This division holds a QB and a wide receiver that I got quite wrong last season. But even though I've conceded those lessons, I think I might be ready to try to be wrong on them again. There's another offense that seems largely irrelevant, but that holds some players who could define this fantasy season. And the most proven offense in the division might be the most mispriced. We're wrapping up our 8-part divisional preview series with the AFC West on an all-new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to, like I said, close out the divisional preview series, AFC West, our 8th and final division. Jared, let's go alphabetically, just like we have through every other division. Start with the Denver Broncos. Tell me what they looked like in 2024.
Yeah, the Broncos offense definitely beat expectations last year. I remember looking at the implied points for last season, and Denver was like bottom 5 in the NFL. They wound up finishing 19th in total yards, 18th in yards per play, and 10th in points per game. Sean Payton, by the way, has now landed 15 of his 17 offenses as a head coach inside the top 12 in points. It was a surprisingly pass-leaning offense, considering they had a rookie quarterback. The Broncos finished 19th in pass rate last year, but they were 7th in both neutral pass rate and pass rate over expected. They were also 7th in red zone pass rate over expected. I think part of that was because the run game was so bad. Javonte Williams, one of the worst running backs in the NFL last year. None of the other guys did a whole lot. The Broncos as a team finished 21st in yards per carry. And that was despite having one of the very best offensive lines in the NFL last year. The Broncos were first in ESPN run block win rate and pass block win rate. They were also first in Pro Football Focus pass blocking grade. They were 10th in PFF run blocking grade. So they definitely had that going for them last year, and they're going to have continuity on the O-line heading into 2025.
Yeah, I like that you said that about the run game. I was going to say probably a big part of that pass lean was that the run game stunk, and we'll talk about what they did to address that. No meaningful coaching changes, but you talked about how Sean Payton has been successful on offense, and I think a couple of minor coaching changes might be relevant to that point. They did lose passing game coordinator John Morton to become OC in Detroit. Their tight ends coach from last year, Declan Doyle, is now the OC in Chicago with Ben Johnson. So clearly, being an offensive coach with Sean Payton helps your profile, probably helps your coaching ability and acumen as well. So doesn't affect Denver. I don't think we're going to see anybody slip because of that, but at least worth noting those two guys where they went from this staff. Denver did sign Evan Engram for 2 years, $23 million at tight end, $16.5 million of that guaranteed. So I think that speaks especially to how much they value him and how big a part he's going to be in the offense. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. They drafted RJ Harvey, the running back, surprisingly in round 2. But we heard quickly thereafter from Sean Payton, it's because he liked him so much, he didn't want to talk about him in the pre-draft process. That's why we were surprised. It was by design. They drafted Pat Bryant, a wide receiver, in round 3. They then signed J.K. Dobbins in early June. 1 year, less than $3 million on that contract. So it's a bit more than J.K. Dobbins got last year to sign with the Chargers, but still a pretty modest deal. Incentives could push it past $5 million this year. A piece of the backfield. And again, we'll talk about exactly how those guys fit together, but that's pretty much it on the changes front. Nothing huge. The two biggest are Evan Engram and RJ Harvey.
Yeah, like you said, no huge additions here, but a bunch of little pieces that I think are going to help. And of course, like I said, they're returning all 5 of those offensive line starters. So to me, this is like a top 5 offensive line in the NFL, which definitely helps all these skill position guys.
Now, let's move on to targets. And I'll start by saying I don't really have any laser targets. There's nobody that I'm going into a draft saying this is the Bronco that I want. The one that I have liked the most to this point is Evan Engram. And it's not so much that I think he's undervalued by the market versus what I expect from him. He's going at the end of round 8. He's tight end 9 in ADP by our consensus PPR ADP right now, which pulls from several different draft sites and is still rounding into shape as we get more drafts into that pool. Tight end 10 in our PPR rankings, so that's one spot below where his ADP is, but he's basically tied with Tucker Kraft and Jake Ferguson in our rankings. I like Evan Engram much more, and I especially prefer Engram as we get to lineup setting time of year over best ball, because I'm not necessarily chasing the ceiling outcome in my tight end. I want somebody that can deliver for me regularly, and I think that's what Evan Engram's going to be in Denver. I think that's what the money tells us. I think that's the way that Sean Payton has been talking about him since signing him, calling him the Joker, which we every offseason we're like, oh, who's Sean Payton's Joker going to be? And anytime he says that some guy has some characteristics that might fit that Joker, we're like, all right, watch Jaleel McLaughlin, watch this guy, watch that guy. I think Evan Engram has the best chance of actually being that guy in this Denver offense, and I think he could lead this team in receptions.
Yeah, I have not drafted much Evan Engram so far, and I won't call him a flat-out fade because I think the price is okay at tight end 9. My concern with him and why I just kind of pass over him most times when I'm in these drafts is he just wasn't very good last year. He was 7th among tight ends in expected PPR points per game, so the role was there. He finished just 14th in actual points per game. He was 21st among 43 tight ends in PFF receiving grade, 30th among those 43 in ESPN receiver score. And I think the most worrisome thing for me last year with Engram is career low 3.2 yards after catch per reception. He was also dead last among 33 qualifying tight ends in yards after catch over expected. And that's kind of like been Evan Ingram's game, right? He's never been a downfield guy. He's never been a big touchdown guy. He's been that volume collector and then gain yardage after the catch. So my concern is just if he's not the same player that he's been, I know Denver wants him to play a big role, but if he doesn't deliver in that role, I could see his role kind of, dwindling over the course of the season.
I guess that's where we disagree. Like the other thing that looked bad in Jacksonville last season was the entire Jacksonville offense. So I would be more worried if that weren't the case, like if he played poorly while the rest of the Jaguars were really good, or if Denver hadn't invested in him this offseason. So that tells me that Sean Payton's like, yeah, I still think Evan Engram's good. And the other part of that is even if he's not the same Evan Engram as he used to be, he could catch 90 balls, average 9 yards per catch, be poor in terms of efficiency and be very good in terms of reliability for my PPR lineup. I think when you pay Evan Engram $16.5 million guaranteed on his contract, you're not saying we're going to try you out. And if you're not that good by the end of October, we're going to elevate Adam Troutman. So I'm not worried about somebody overtaking him. I think Evan Ingram's going to be a good source of receptions at the very least all year.
Got just 90 balls, I'm in trouble. I would rather have Jake Ferguson 2 or 3 rounds later.
Are you targeting anybody else in this offense?
Yeah, the closest targets to me in this offense are the running backs, and we're actually slightly behind ADP on both these guys. Yeah, we have RJ Harvey RB27. His ADP is RB25. We have J.K. Dobbins RB39. His ADP is RB36. So just slightly behind. But I don't want to be out on these guys because Sean Payton backfields have been so good for fantasy football. His teams have finished top 8 in total running back PPR points in 14 of his 17 seasons as a head coach. That includes 11 of those offenses finishing top 2 in total running back PPR points. So there's going to be points to go around here. Exactly how they're going to be divvied, where they're going to come from, we're not yet sure. It sounds like J.K. Dobbins is running as the RB1 in training camp so far, which is not a surprise. I mean, we know it takes these rookies time. I think that if there was a knock against RJ Harvey beyond the fact that he's 24 years old, it was his pass protection ability. I think that's going to be an issue. He's going to have to earn trust there to play on passing downs. But again, I want pieces of both these guys because I do expect there to be lots of fantasy points to be had in this backfield.
They look similar to Engram to me in that they're fine at value. I don't think that they're undervalued. I don't think they're really overvalued. And like you said, I don't want to be out on Denver's running backs. The difference between these guys and Engram for me is that I'm not as sure that Harvey or Dobbins is going to be somebody I can confidently put into a lineup. So I'm in. I'm not chasing them. I think they're fairly priced. I think Harvey is certainly more interesting, RB25 and ADP. Obviously, that's what the market's saying. I think that's the way Denver is hoping it's going to work out, even if Dobbins is working ahead of him in practice right now. But they're both going in fine ranges. J.K. Dobbins is going in handcuff territory. So even if he's just that, he's fine at the end of round 9. I think Marvin Mims is similar in that he's fine late round 12. I don't think Marvin Mims is going to become somebody that we want to put into lineups in all but the deepest fantasy leagues. So like if you like him at that range, if you like him as a wide receiver 6, that's fine. I won't argue against that. But I don't think that he's got something bigger in store for us this year. And otherwise, like Pat Bryant and the other wide receivers are undrafted by ADP. I think if you want to toss any of those guys at the end of a roster, that's fine as well. Because there is some opportunity for, a tertiary target, I guess, to emerge in this offense.
Yeah, there is. I'm curious to see, though, this wide receiver core last year was a lot like what we get in Green Bay, where they were just rotating guys in and out, on and off the field behind Courtland Sutton. Outside of Sutton last year, there were only 3 instances of a Broncos receiver reaching an 80% route rate in a game. An 80% route rate is, I guess, what I would consider like a full-time player. So we just didn't get that last year. They were rotating 2, 3, 4 guys behind Courtland Sutton. I'm not sure if it's going to change this year. I think, Marvin Mims kind of just, he projects as a, part-time-ish player. And you guys got, I like Pat Bryant, but I don't think he's going to be ready right away to play a big role. Troy Franklin, Devon Vele. I think it's going to be similar where you're going to have Sutton on the field almost every snap. Ingram's going to be, close to a full-time player, at least on passing situations. But beyond that, I think they're just going to be rotating these guys. So that makes it tough for me to get excited about any of these other wide receivers behind Sutton.
Yeah, I'm unexcited about any of them for that reason. Courtland Sutton is also, though, on my fades list. Not a strong fade. I think he's fine at wide receiver 22, going around the 4-5 turn by consensus ADP. That's exactly where he finished in PPR points per game last year. The case against him for me starts with who's going behind him, though, in ADP. Devontae Smith, Rashee Rice, Zay Flowers, Calvin Ridley, Jamison Williams, Tet McMillan. Those last 3 guys are all around plus behind Courtland Sutton in ADP. I don't think he beats anybody in that group in upside. So he's okay if I end up taking him in there, but I like those players better, both at cost and maybe even just all of them straight up, honestly.
Yeah, I don't have much Sutton. I've been wondering if I should be drafting him more because he's wide receiver 22 in ADP. He was wide receiver 12 in expected PPR points per game last year. The volume was really strong, 23.7% target share. He was 4th in the NFL in red zone targets, tied for 2nd in the NFL in end zone targets. But his efficiency was kind of just okay. He was actually 32nd in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route among 84 qualifying wide receivers. So the efficiency was just okay. He turns 30 in October, and I do think he has more target competition this season. I do still think he'll be the number 1 target in this passing game, but I do think the target share is going to come down a little bit. So ultimately, because like you said, Matt, I have been taking those receivers who to me are just more exciting, the Jamison Williams, George Pickens, Tet McMillan tier. I've been taking those guys ahead of Courtland Sutton, having some, second guesses of whether that's the right thing to do, but I think I'm going to go with it because I do think we kind of saw the peak for Courtland Sutton last year.
I wouldn't put Courtland Sutton on a must-avoid list, but like you said with the efficiency metrics, he's just okay. That's what he's always been. That's what his price is. So if you want him, fine. I don't think he's going to kill your season, but I also don't think he's going to define your season. Bo Nix, we've talked about. A similar fade, not somebody that I think is going to kill you as the QB 8 in ADP, but I don't have any reason to go after him there because I don't think his upside really climbs much beyond that.
Agree. I actually like Bo Nix, but he's just kind of priced out for me. He's going 2 rounds ahead of Justin Fields, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott. Those guys all project similar to me. Nix made that nice jump over the second half of last season. Over his last 10 games, 70% completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt. He was 12th among quarterbacks in PFF receiving grade or PFF passing grade over that span. So that's nice to see. And then of course he gives you some rushing too. Nix was 8th among quarterbacks in rushing yards last year. So just being in this Sean Payton offense, I do think the weaponry is better. Like I think Nix is probably going to finish like around where he's being drafted, like quarterback 8, quarterback 10, somewhere in there. But again, just where he's going compared to those other guys, Justin Fields, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott, I just don't end up drafting a whole lot of Bo Nix.
Yeah, I don't think that there's I don't think that Bo Nix is a much better fantasy prospect for 2025 than Trevor Lawrence, and their ADPs are wildly different.
And I don't think Nix has like the upside to kill you for not having, much exposure to him.
Agreed. Kansas City Chiefs, though, might still have upside. What did they look like in 2024? Because even though they went to the Super Bowl, the offense didn't quite look like what we've gotten used to.
Right. Yeah. If the Broncos beat expectations, the Chiefs definitely fell short of expectations last year. They were just 15th in the NFL in points scored. They were 16th in total yards, 21st in yards per play, and just not an efficient offense. They were 28th in yards per carry as a team, 23rd in yards per pass attempt. They also struggled inside the red zone. They were 22nd in the league in red zone touchdown rate. This did remain a pass-leaning offense. The Chiefs last year finished 10th in pass rate, 5th in neutral pass rate, and 2nd in pass rate over expected. But the 58.8% pass rate the Chiefs finished with last year was pretty easily the lowest in the Patrick Mahomes era. They had been very consistently between 61 and 62% in the previous 6 seasons under Mahomes. Again, that dropped to 58.8% last year.
And it makes sense that they had, by the numbers, a lesser version of Travis Kelce. They lost Rashee Rice early. They lost Marquise Brown before the season even started. So their top receiver remaining was a rookie that they had to bring along somewhat slowly. So there was reason for the Chiefs to not be so confident in throwing the ball. Of course, they also lost Isiah Pacheco early in the season. We'll talk about all of that going forward. The biggest difference, I think, in looking at what's new for this year's Chiefs is probably those healthy returns. Like I said, Rashee Rice went down in week 4. He's back healthy. Marquise Brown effectively missed the season. I know that he returned to play a limited role late in the year and through the playoffs, but certainly never to the degree that they envisioned heading into last season after signing him in free agency. Isiah Pacheco did return from his broken leg, clearly was not himself, did not get his usual work. They tried to give him more work right after he came back, and then they were like, we're not this version of Isiah. We're going to keep giving the ball to Kareem Hunt because he's better at the moment. They drafted Josh Simmons at the end of round 1 this spring to start at left tackle. They traded away guard Joe Thuney, replacing him in-house. The other 3 starters return on the offensive line. So good continuity up front. Some other relatively minor additions. They drafted wide receiver Jalen Royals in round 4. They drafted running back Brashard Smith in round 7. They signed Elijah Mitchell to a small deal early in free agency. They did bring back Kareem Hunt as well shortly thereafter on a similar size deal. No huge moves for this offense, but let's hope that offensive line gets better and the skill positions stay healthier.
Yeah, the left tackle spot's definitely the biggest thing for me here in Kansas City, because that was a major issue last year. And like you said, Matt, they draft Josh Simmons at 32nd overall. I think there was some talk like early in the draft process that he wouldn't be ready for the start of the season coming off the patellar tendon tear, but he's been like a full go in training camp based on everything I've read, and it does look like he's set to open the season as their starting left tackle. And I think without that injury, it sounds like he would have been like a top 15, top 10 pick. So that could really, kind of change the fortunes of this Chiefs offense, because again, the pass protection was an issue last year.
Yeah, and I think that he's drawn some comparisons to Trent Williams along the way, which is certainly a nice territory for an offensive tackle to be. Let's start off the target section. I think it would be disingenuous to start it with anybody besides Isiah Pacheco, just in case you didn't read our comeback article. He is the runner-up for that spot. And really, if you're wondering why Isiah Pacheco is not our comeback player, it's basically because Jared wouldn't let me name him the comeback player.
Yeah, I just think there's still a bit more downside than you're giving the situation credit for, but I'm definitely in on Pacheco at his RB 28 ADP. I think the RB 28 ADP, I mean, that captures a lot of that downside. We have him RB 21 in our rankings, and he can finish much higher than that. Go back to 2023, Pacheco finished 14th in PPR points per game, and that was despite him kind of opening the season in like a part-time role. If you go from week 4 on in 2023, RB 7 in PPR points per game. And really, he opened last year with an even better role than he did in that 2023 season. First 2 games of last season, 17 carries per game, 4 targets per game. Then he breaks his leg. Obviously, he's not the same player for the rest of the season, but everything we've heard this offseason is that, Pacheco is at least pretty close to that, pre-injury form.
Yeah, and just in case you haven't been following along, that's the kind of stuff we've been pointing out. I would be more worried about the way Pacheco played last year if the Chiefs showed more of an effort to build out the backfield this offseason, but they just signed Mitchell, brought back Kareem Hunt on that small deal, waited till round 7 to draft Brashard Smith, and all the positive words from Andy Reid say that they expect Pacheco to be back to what he was pre-injury. And like you said, Jared, that ADP is the key. If he were going inside the top 20, I'd be like, yeah, this is a guy with some risk. Maybe he just shares the ball with Kareem Hunt all season. But at RB 28, I think he's being drafted at his healthy floor. I think as long as he doesn't get hurt again, he should at least be in that range. And the upside is that RB 15 area where we saw him finish a couple years ago.
Yeah, and just in training camp, there has been some Brashard Smith working in with the first team offense. I saw a tweet from one of the Chiefs beat writers that called Pacheco the 1A in the backfield, Kareem Hunt the 1B. So again, and even our projections do not have Pacheco playing the role he played in 2023 or even to start 2024. We have him losing, some of that work, some of the work to Hunt, maybe some pass catching stuff to Smith. But I do still think if he's healthy, he's going to be the lead back in this offense that I expect to rebound and, be a top 5 offense again this season.
And that's the other key factor here is I think that we could get, if everybody stays healthy, a Chiefs offense that's much closer to what it was before the last two seasons and really just last year, because even in 2023, they finished ninth in total yards, 15th in scoring. So those two didn't align. The 15th in scoring, they matched last year, but they were also worse in picking up yardage last year. So I think as long as everybody's healthy, we should get an overall offensive bounce back. That's bound to be good for the number one running back. It's also, I think, a reason that I find really all the Chiefs to be a little bit underpriced, not so dramatically underpriced that I'm gobbling them up as much as I can, but that they're all like, all right, I guess this guy makes sense here. Maybe I'll take some of this guy here, especially best ball when I'm, trying to build out a portfolio and getting some exposure to all these different players. It's tough to find guys that are overpriced in this Chiefs offense. Next guy up on my list is Rashee Rice, who is a little bit tougher to gauge because we still don't know about suspension from the league. But I guess I shouldn't even speculate on that because we don't know anything about whether and how much the league's going to suspend him. We've heard that it's expected. It's kind of weird that we've gotten this close to the season and it hasn't happened given how long they've had to think about what the suspension should be. So we'll see where that goes. But just the chance of it following his case being settled has knocked him down in ADP, wide receiver 24 by consensus ADP in the middle of round 5.
Yeah, we have him wide receiver 16 now. We have him docked 2 games right now, which I do think is much closer to the floor than, the ceiling in terms of suspension. I've even heard like 6 and 8 games thrown around as possibilities. We might be high on Rice if we're kind of underestimating the suspension risk. But again, no one knows at this point. I just want to bet on Rashee Rice when he's on the field. I mean, you look at his last 13 games, so final 10 games of his rookie season, and then the 3 full games he played last year, over 9 targets per game, 7.2 catches per game, 82 yards, 0.46 touchdowns. That's 18.1 PPR points per game in his last 13 healthy games. That would have been wide receiver 8 last year, tied with Malik Neighbors. So that's the type of upside you're getting. As he started to slip into round 4 and even round 5 now, I've been taking a bunch of Rashee Rice, and I think he's a better pick in lineup setting leagues because, in best ball, you're kind of just forced to sit on those zeros. Not that you're taking him in your lineup, but you're, losing a potential receiver in best ball. In lineup setting leagues, now you just stick him on your bench, wait the, 2-4 games, hopefully. Then I think you're going to have a borderline wide receiver 1 for, the final 2/3, 3/4 of the season.
Yeah, and I'm certainly in at that round 5 price tag. Very easy to draft insurance behind him if he does get suspended. And we should assume some missed games at this point. I think 6 games is crazy because it's not like he was a violent offender. I'm not saying that what he did wasn't bad, but we've seen much worse offenses get much smaller suspensions. So I'm not too worried about how much time Rashee Rice is going to miss. The other guy that's tethered to Rashee Rice right now is Xavier Worthy. So I think we should go to him next. And how they work with each other in ADP can vary by platform. I was a little surprised to see in prepping for this show. By the consensus ADP, Xavier Worthy is in the second half of round 5. He's just behind Rashee Rice. Wide receiver 25 in that ADP. He's way ahead of Rashee Rice if you look at drafters, though. Wide receiver 19 early in round 4. Rice is wide receiver 30 on there right now. So if that holds true in, home league type of drafts, I'm definitely in on Rashee Rice. But what do you got on Xavier Worthy?
Yeah, and most of the drafts I've been in lately, Worthy's going well ahead of Rashee Rice. And I think by the time most folks are drafting in their home leagues, we're going to know about Rashee Rice, so we won't have to be guessing on this stuff. But I'm in on Worthy in general. It's gotten to the point now. I was taking more Worthy than Rice for much of the draft season, but now that they've flipped so much and we got their Rice news and everyone's expecting evidently a much longer suspension than we are, I've been taking more Rice, but I'm definitely still in on Worthy. He closed his rookie season really strongly. Final 10 games of his rookie season, 7.6 targets, 5.8 catches, 68 yards, 0.6 touchdowns over those 10 games. Also ran for 75 yards and a touchdown. He averaged 17.5 PPR points per game over those final 10 games. That would have been wide receiver 11 last year. Even if you want to take away the Super Bowl stats, which I know a lot of people do, because a lot of the stuff came in garbage time, 15.5 PPR points per game. That would have been wide receiver 17 last year. So still a very nice close to Worthy's rookie season. And even if you just compare Worthy's rookie season, final 8 games, Rashee Rice's rookie season, final 8 games, and just look at some of the more advanced metrics, throwing out the actual production, Worthy edges Rice in yards per route, 2.06 to 2.05. Also beat Rashee Rice in PFF receiving grade, 82.4 to 81.0. So I think, Rice is likely going to be this team's number one wide receiver when he's eligible to play, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that, Worthy matches or even beats him in targets. And I think that wasn't factored into their ADPs for much of draft season. I think by this point, again, Worthy's not such a great value, but that also could flip again if, Rice's suspension comes in at 2 to 4 games. So fluid situation, but I think, the thing for me is I want to be in on both these guys.
I mean, is it possible that Xavier Worthy gets more targets? Sure, it's possible, but I think it's highly unlikely because once everybody's healthy, Xavier Worthy is more of a downfield receiver. They tried that with him last year. It didn't really work great. And then they lost Rashee Rice and pretty much everything else and but worked Xavier Worthy much shorter. And that's where he got those late season numbers when there weren't other people around. He's a good player. He was a first-round pick. He was a productive college player. I certainly like him as a prospect. I like a wide receiver with Patrick Mahomes. If Xavier Worthy is anywhere in the teens in ADP or in my individual drafts, I'm not interested because I do think Rashee Rice is going to beat him production-wise this year. If Xavier Worthy is around that wide receiver 25 ADP, that's fine. I don't think he's going to kill anybody from that spot, but I do still think that we're more likely looking at a wide receiver 3 than somebody with actual wide receiver 1 upside.
Yeah, I mean, Worthy was undoubtedly a better prospect than Rashee Rice. I know Rice at this point has a slightly longer track record of NFL production, but I guess I'm not convinced we're going to go back to it being Rashee Rice. You're this pure short range possession type receiver guy, and Worthy, you're this pure, deep ball guy. I think there might be some mixing and matching of roles. The other thing on Worthy's deep balls is you're going to get positive regression on the deep balls this season. If you watched any Xavier Worthy last year, you saw him either, flubbing opportunities downfield or Mahomes just flat out missing him downfield. Worthy last year caught 3 of his 17 targets of 20 plus yards, an 18% catch rate. He's too good. Mahomes is too good for that to continue. He's going to connect on more of those deep balls this season.
Yep. I think it's just similar to Marvin Harrison Jr. for me in that I expect him to be better than last year, but the market is expecting him to be more better than I'm expecting. So he's priced out of me betting on that improvement this season. Long term, we'll see exactly what happens, but he's just a player that the fantasy market and Jared are more excited about than I am.
Fair.
Patrick Mahomes, by the way, in between those two guys, and if you are excited about Xavier Worthy, if you're like, oh, Rashee Rice is definitely going to help my team whenever he's available, if you're excited about any aspect of the offense, then you should probably at least be somewhat interested in Patrick Mahomes. He's not underpriced at QB6. And if you look at our ADP market index page, it says that he's a strong negative value. Maybe that ends up being true, and maybe he winds up by the end of the season being somebody that you should not have drafted and should have focused somewhere else on some other position. But I do also think that Patrick Mahomes, if everybody's healthy around him, if we don't get this long suspension from Rashee Rice, could have the kind of season that Joe Burrow had last year, where he's challenging for the league lead in passing yards, in passing touchdowns, and, has upside all the way into the top 3 at quarterback. If everything is breaking right for him.
Yeah, Mahomes is entirely price dependent for me. I mean, I've drafted a lot of Mahomes in round 7 and even round 8 in best ball. If you go to our consensus ADP, he's at 54th overall. I am not drafting Patrick Mahomes at 54th overall. We have him 86th overall in our rankings. That's kind of the range where I'm starting to think about him. I'm obviously coming off the disappointing 2024 season. A lot went wrong, as we've talked about. He finished quarterback 14 in points per game, but the opportunity was still there. Mahomes was quarterback 3 in expected points per game last year. The volume was still there. The red zone pass attempts were still there. The downfield shots were there for the taking. They just didn't connect on him. And that's kind of been the biggest issue for Mahomes. He's averaged just 6.9 yards per pass attempt over the last 2 seasons. That's down from 8.1 yards per attempt over the first 5. He's been throwing more short range, 6.3 yard average target depth over the last 2 seasons. And just, again, he just has not been connecting on those deep shots, even when he has taken shots downfield. But the Chiefs coaching staff has talked about that being like the focal point for Mahomes this offseason is the deep passing game. And they've obviously added, Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown has speed. Like, they have speedy receivers now to make that happen. So I'm expecting the Chiefs' deep passing game to be a lot better this year than it has been. And that's obviously going to help Mahomes.
Yeah, they clearly tried to help that last year, fix that last year by signing Marquise Brown and drafting Xavier Worthy. And then they lost Brown to that shoulder injury before the season. And, then other parts of the offense fell apart and made it more difficult to throw deep downfield, including the protection up front that we talked about with drafting Josh Simmons. So if they get better protection, if he has healthier receivers, there should be more deep passing. And, unless you think Patrick Mahomes is just not as good as he used to be, you should at least be okay with him at cost. Like you said, though, Jared, I think it can depend very much on exactly where he goes. I'm not reaching for him. If he falls around past ADP, I start to get interested regardless of what else I have, unless, of course, I already drafted Jalen Hurts. Travis Kelce is in the second half of round 6. He's tight end 5 by ADP right now. I think that's a fair price for him. We have to see if he's a declining player, which we should probably expect at his age, or if he is back in better shape than last year and, still maybe declining when you look at the overall career trend line, but potentially better than he was in 2024.
Same deal with Kelce here as with Mahomes, price dependent. Like I've gotten him in round 8, round 9 in best ball drafts. I like him there at 68th overall. That's too early for me. We do have Kelce tight end 5, but he's really right there with TJ Hawkinson, David Njoku, Mark Andrews. Njoku and Andrews are going, 2-3 rounds. I think even in your more home league drafts, you're going to see Njoku especially go quite a bit later than Travis Kelce. So again, if he's going in like round 6, I'm going to be out at that price tag. There's definitely an argument for Travis Kelce. He was second among tight ends last year in expected PPR points per game. Actually, he had more expected points per game last year than he did in 2023. So the usage was still there. He is definitely in for positive touchdown regression. He actually led all tight ends in expected receiving touchdowns last year, 8.7, but he scored just 3. So he's going to score more touchdowns this season. But obviously the argument against him is just he's 36 or he's turning 36 in October, set career lows last year in basically everything: yards per catch, yards per target, yards per route run, yards after catch per reception, career lows and all that stuff. And I do think, he's going to have more target competition this season, assuming these guys stay healthy. Rashee Rice is not suspended for, a ton of the season. Like the targets are going to be tougher to come by for a Travis Kelce. So I think he's going to do enough to be like a fine tight end 1. I think, the days of him being a fantasy difference maker are definitely behind him.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Marquise Brown, I think, is interesting in round 13, even if for no other purpose than to be like a handcuff pick. He should see more targets whenever Rashee Rice ends up being suspended. And if either Rice or Worthy misses time, Marquise Brown could be a startable like wide receiver 3. We're also, waiting to see exactly how the targets get spread around this offense, because we've said it before, this is probably the best set of wide receivers that Patrick Mahomes has ever had, at the very least since Tyreek Hill was around. But even then, it was Tyreek Hill and not other stars joining him most of the time. So a good wide receiver core. Patrick Mahomes has talked up Marquise Brown's talent. There's room for Brown to get more targets than are anticipated. I think there's room for him to possibly return like wide receiver 4 level, where you're looking at him as a flex play in half PPR, full PPR leagues. Start him certainly in the reserve level, but I'm interested.
Yeah, I had been drafting a lot of Marquise Brown. He got a 1-year, $7 million deal. It was almost fully guaranteed. So not big money, but like enough where the contract plus just his NFL resume, I think, makes him a pretty safe bet to, be the number 3 wide receiver here when all these guys are available. Of course, when Rashee Rice is, we're assuming suspended to start the season, Marquise Brown is going to move up a notch on the totem pole and, potentially get more targets early in the season. My issue is he suffered this ankle injury like a week ago, and we've heard nothing about it. But Andy Reid made a comment a couple days ago that he was like, "Oh yeah, Marquise Brown's working back from this. Good news is he's not going to need surgery." I was like, just the fact that he had to say that makes me think the ankle might be, more serious than what we've heard so far. There's been no reporting on it, so I'm keeping an eye on that. If Brown is still out a week or 2 from now, we're probably gonna have to move him down our rankings, because again, a lot of the value with Brown for me, especially in lineup setting leagues, is that role early in the season when Rice is out. But if Brown's also going to be out, that takes away a lot of his appeal.
For sure. And we learned last year not to underweight him not being on the field the closer we get to the season. It's kind of nuts to me how many people we have watching all these practices, and yet how poor the reporting is overall. Like somebody should be pushing Andy Reid to give some details on what's up with Marquise Brown. But what we get is a bunch of reporters not even specifying which ankle it is on a lot of these guys.
Exactly.
I'm not super interested in anybody else from this Kansas City offense. Kareem Hunt's going late in round 14. I mean, fine as a handcuff. Elijah Mitchell, mid round 16, still has a shot to be the handcuff, but it certainly sounds like Kareem Hunt is ahead of him. And Brashard Smith, I think he's basically undrafted. So if you want to stash him at the end of a bench, fine. He's going to be sharing work with one or two other people if Pacheco goes down.
Yeah, I don't want Kareem Hunt. He was horrible last year. I think if the Chiefs have to play him in a significant role again this year, they're in trouble. Elijah Mitchell's tough for me. It sounds at this point that he's, third on the depth chart, and, we'll kind of see where it goes from there. But RB57 is a bit too pricey for me. I do take Brashard Smith every once in a while with like my last pick or two. I think you're hoping for like a Jerick McKinnon type role from Brashard Smith. That's kind of the upside because he is a pass catching back. I don't think he's going to lead in carries or anything like that, but potentially on passing downs. And then I've started to mix Jalen Royals in as well because there's been a lot of positive camp buzz on him. And again, if Marquise Brown's ankle injury is serious and Rashee Rice is suspended to start the season, there could actually be some snaps available for Royals. And he's a similar archetype to Rashee Rice where, he's going to do a lot of that yards after catch stuff.
Now, somebody who got multiple starter weeks out of Kareem Hunt last season might be surprised to hear you say he was horrible. So what do you mean by that?
Horrible. It was all volume based and, the touchdowns he scored, right? Like he was in a role to produce, but you look at how he performed, 3.6 yards per carry. His rankings among 47 running backs with 90 plus carries last year, 43rd among those 47 in rush yards over expected per attempt, 43rd in yards after contact per attempt, 32nd in PFF rushing grade. So just nothing you can point to say that, he was a good player last year. It was just the opportunity he had.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping the Chiefs would not bring him back. Obviously, that's the biggest mark in his favor is they did bring him back. So if Pacheco goes down, then maybe we get something similar. But, we'll see where that goes. Up next, the Las Vegas Raiders. And whereas not too much changed on the Kansas City offense, lots has changed with the Raiders. But before we get to that, tell me what 2024 looked like that made them go through this upheaval.
Yeah, 2024 for Vegas was Brock Bowers, a little Jakobi Meyers, and not much else. The Raiders finished 29th in points scored, 27th in yards, 28th in yards per play. I think the interesting thing to note and is relevant heading into 2025 is there was strong passing volume from this team. The Raiders were 10th in pass rate last year. They were 5th in neutral pass rate. They were also 7th in offensive plays. So they finished 6th last year in total pass attempts. And I think that number is probably going to come down in 2025.
Yeah, and it's probably primarily because they sucked in the backfield. So there was no reason to hand anybody the ball. I mean, as soon as that team removed the interim label from Antonio Pierce and made him the head coach for 2024, I was like, all right, so here's somebody that's going to be fired after this season, and then we'll see what the next move is. It never seemed like things were going to go well, and they did not go especially well for the Raiders last year. But that's why we now have head coach Pete Carroll back in the league, in charge of the Raiders. New offensive coordinator Chip Kelly, we've talked about plenty, talked about his specific impact on offenses on our Coaching Changes show a couple months ago. So we can expect a faster pace. We can expect him to pull scoring efficiency out of players who deserve the touches. The team did sign Geno Smith to play quarterback. Big upgrade over what they ran out there last season, Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. They, of course, drafted Ashton Jeanty, 6th overall. Then they drafted Jack Besh, wide receiver, in round 2. Another wide receiver, Dante Thornton, in round 4. They signed guard Alex Kappa to a modest 2-year deal after he spent the past 3 years starting for the Bengals. Doesn't look like a difference maker. And then finally, they effectively swapped Alexander Mattison for Raheem Mostert in the backfield. I'm not sure either team in that swap is a winner.
No winners there. I think the coaching change is the most significant thing here. Again, with Chip Kelly, the first thing is the pace. You mentioned, Matt. All 4 of his NFL offenses so far, it was 3 with the Eagles, 1 with the 49ers, finished first in seconds per play, and most of them were by a wide margin. So fast-paced, more plays. I do think, Kelly, I wouldn't call him a run-heavy play caller, but definitely run-leaning. His teams, their rankings in run rate over his 4 seasons, 6th, 14th, 17th, and 4th. So 2 run-heavy offenses, 2 kind of middling. I do think drafting Ashton Jeanty obviously is going to push this team towards the run. So that's the big thing for me is this Raiders offense was pass-heavy with high pass volume last year. I think that stuff's going to come down with Kelly, with Ashton Jeanty.
And his Philly teams didn't finish with very good running backs, so I'm sure that factored into that run pass split. We can at least call him a run friendly coach. And then let's start with Ashton Jeanty. He's going inside the first round in ADP, so I don't think you can really call him a target. 11th overall, he's RB5. I think he's fine in that range. He's not somebody that I want to fade, even though obviously he's a rookie, so we don't know how he's going to produce. And we don't know a whole lot about this Raiders offense. Even though the key pieces have experience, we've certainly never seen them play together before. So it's tough to project what to expect. But Ashton Jeanty was so good, and he's so well positioned to get big time volume every week that I want to be in on what happens with him this year. I like him straight up over Jahmyr Gibbs in that range.
I mean, we're 2 spots below ADP consensus on Ashton Jeanty. He's 9th overall in ADP. We have him 11th overall. It's Malik Neighbors and Nico Collins, the 2 guys we have over Ashton Jeanty that are behind him in ADP. But again, like you said, Matt, definitely not someone I want to be out on. Definitely make sure you get some exposure to Ashton Jeanty in best ball. Obviously an elite prospect, 2,600 rushing yards last year, 5.25 yards after contact per attempt for Jeanty last year. Just absurd. That's like a good straight up yards per carry number. He did that just after contact. I think the receiving stuff is most interesting here too, though, because Jeanty was not very good in the passing game last year, just 23 catches, but he was much better in 2023. Caught 43 balls that year, averaged 3.19 yards per route. That's an awesome number for a running back, and this Raiders coaching staff has talked up Jeanty's ability in the passing game. So, I mean, you just look at the draft capital they gave him. I don't think he's going to come off the field on passing downs. I think he's going to be a 3-down back, and he's going to get all the volume he can handle. I think Jeanty's ceiling goes to RB1. Like, I think he could get the Bijan Robinson workload this year and be just a bit more efficient and outscore Bijan Robinson. I think his ceiling goes that high.
I'm pretty sure that the last guy to average 5.25 yards after contact per carry was Bo Jackson and Tecmo Bowl. The other target for me on this Raiders offense is Jakobi Meyers. He's going at the 7-8 turn, wide receiver 39 in that consensus ADP. Strong value, I think, in any format, but even more attractive to me in lineup setting where I'm not necessarily chasing that ultimate ceiling in the range where I'm drafting him. You still want ceiling. We still want to target players with high ceilings, but I do think that Jakobi Meyers' ceiling is underrated when we talk about him as a fantasy prospect in that range. We talk about the floor. We talk about him being a safe bet for receptions, but if you're drafted at wide receiver 39 and you've showed us that you can score inside the top 24, that's an attractive ceiling from that draft position. I think he's well positioned to get similar target share to what he got after Devontae Adams left town last year. Brock Bowers is still there. He was there last year. Didn't stop Jakobi Meyers from getting plenty of work in that range. So I think Meyers is just a more attractive pick at cost than you probably think he is when you're looking at him in your draft.
Totally agree. I think he's the new Tyler Lockett. We cashed in on Lockett for so many years. I think, Lockett's kind of done now. Myers has kind of stepped in and taken his place. Jakobi Meyers last year was 14th among receivers in expected PPR points per game. He ends up finishing wide receiver 23. That follows wide receiver 28 and wide receiver 30 finishes the previous 2 seasons. Again, I do think his volume probably comes down a little. I think his target share is going to remain pretty similar to last year, but the overall pass volume in Vegas comes down a little bit. But I think the efficiency can improve with this coaching staff and with Geno Smith, who's a huge upgrade over the quarterbacks the Raiders had last year.
And perhaps the passing volume doesn't come down too much if we do get the fast-paced offense that we were talking about with Chip Kelly. Like, they could run the ball more than last year's team did on a rate basis and still pass in a similar range to what they did last year. Like you said, Geno Smith is there now. Basically not there, though, if you look at ADPs. QB 26, mid-round 18. I don't think Geno Smith's going to be a high-impact quarterback for one QB formats, but I think he's a pretty strong value for Superflex, where you can get one guy early and then wait as long as you want, pretty much, because you can take little stops along the way and be like, all right, should I draft a QB here? I also like the wide receivers available. And then you can check the board and say, oh, I've still got another 2 rounds before Geno Smith's ADP. I think I can wait.
Yep. We have Geno quarterback 23. So we're 4 spots ahead of ADP. I like him in Superflex. I like him as a quarterback 3 in best ball. He was still really good last year. 7th in PFF passing grade, 8th in adjusted completion rate, 1st in the league in on target pass rate last season. So still super efficient. The weapons are good enough, especially when you factor in, Jeanty's impact in the passing game. Geno Smith last year, he was quarterback 16 in fantasy points per game. He still gives us a little rushing too. He had 22, 10, and 16 rushing yards per game over his last 3 seasons now. So I know he's like in his mid 30s or whatever, but I do still think he's going to give us some extra fantasy value with his legs. So again, I think he's going to pretty easily beat his current ADP. Not going to be a difference maker, but in Superflex, in best ball, I think he's a good value.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else you're targeting from this Raiders team?
Well, I mean, I'm happy that we're now ahead of consensus ADP on Brock Bowers because, for early best ball season, he was going like early round 2, mid round 2, and we were always behind that, which is just uncomfortable. I don't want to be betting against this guy. He was obviously an elite prospect coming into the league, and then just scored the second most PPR points per game by a rookie tight end in NFL history. Bowers last year had the 3rd most catches by a tight end in NFL history. Any tight end, not just rookies, the 3rd most catches by any tight end in NFL history. And again, same thing with Meyers. I think Bowers' total volume probably comes down a little from last year, but I think the efficiency is going to improve when you talk about, him entering his 2nd season, the quarterback upgrade. So, we are actually now 4 spots ahead of ADP on Brock Bowers, 21st in our overall rankings. He's going 25th in overall ADP.
Yeah, positive value, as you mentioned, by our ADP market index. Worth mentioning that so is every tight end not named Jonnu Smith. So the market in general is undervaluing the position. I'm still not excited to draft Brock Bowers at the 2-3 turn, but there are situations where I'll consider him. There are player combos in that range where I'm not super excited. And certainly, I think in a one-off team where I'm just competing in a single league as opposed to a tournament, I'm less worried about missing out on something that's going to shape my season by taking Bowers than I am when I'm, trying to win a large field tournament.
Yeah, it's always like the T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs. I think those are the type of guys you're comparing to Brock Bowers. Again, I think that's where he belongs.
Yep.
Like he's not an auto click for me in that range, but he's definitely someone I consider and will mix in.
Agree. I'm interested in Michael Mayer, and I think like Geno Smith, he's probably not going to make an impact in standard sized fantasy leagues, but there is at the very least some handcuff upside. And you don't normally think about that with a tight end, but if you do draft Brock Bowers, I would strongly consider handcuffing Michael Mayer if you have room to do so, because he's been a significant part of the pass offense by the reports I've read in training camp for an offense that really doesn't have a whole lot besides Brock Bowers and Jakobi Meyers in terms of proven pass catching. Michael Mayer was an early 2nd round prospect, went 1 spot behind Sam Laporta. He disappeared last year, literally and figuratively, if we're looking at fantasy, but he's talented. He was a highly productive receiver at Notre Dame, and there is room for him to be involved with the Raiders. I think at the very least, he's a more interesting tight end 3 in best ball than his ADP suggests. I do think, though, that there is also room for him to sneak into relevance in lineup setting fantasy leagues.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about plenty of times how rare it is for 2 tight ends to be fantasy relevant on the same team. And I don't think Michael Mayer will get to that point in lineup setting leagues where we're even considering him an option. But I do think in best ball, he's good enough. I do buy that, this team's going to be near the top of the league in 2 tight end sets. And that still probably means like 30-40% of their snaps only. But I think there's enough there for Mayer to at least be someone who gives you, like 3 to 4 usable weeks in best ball. And there is still the chance he's traded. It's getting late in the game for that at this point. But if he was traded, landing spot dependent, he could like jump into the top 15 tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, a trade could even happen into the season. We'll see about that. I wouldn't draft him right now expecting a trade, but that is one path to potential relevance. I just a name to be aware of at the very least if Brock Bowers goes down. Keep Michael Mayer in mind as a waiver wire guy. I think the only other guy worth talking about here is Jack Besh, and I know what we're both doing. We're fading him, even though he's at the end of round 13. We're not crushing you from that level. I just don't expect anything this season.
Me either. Not a prospect I love, and a strange profile. Had a pretty impressive freshman season at LSU, but then did nothing his next 2 years. Had a pretty solid 2024, but again, it was as a 4th year college player. He did get nice draft capital. I'm trying to keep that in mind. Maybe I shouldn't be all out on this guy, but everything we've heard out of Raiders camp is that he's getting fewer first team reps than fellow rookie Dante Thornton. And, it sounds like it's been Thornton, Meyers, and Trey Tucker's the first team wide receivers. And it sounds like they're, Besh is kind of the backup to Meyers as like a primary slot receiver. So I'm not sure he's going to be on the field a whole lot to start the season. He's definitely someone I have not been taking at cost right now.
Player that I think I want to end up rooting for career-wise, but I don't think he's making a 2025 impact. Let's close out this division with the Los Angeles Chargers. Jared, what did they look like in the first season of Jim Harbaugh?
Yeah, the Chargers last year, they finished 11th in total points. They were just 20th in total yards, 15th in yards per play. This was a slow-paced, low-volume offense, which has been a theme of Harbaugh-Roman teams. Last year's Chargers finished 29th in total plays, and they were dead last in both pace and neutral pace. And if you look at where Harbaugh and Roman's previous teams finished in total plays, 24th, 30th, 31st, and 21st. So that's one knock against this offense is I think we should expect it to be near the bottom of the league in total plays. The run game struggled last year for the Chargers, which is not something we're used to out of Harbaugh Roman teams. The Chargers last year just 22nd in yards per carry as a team. The pass game was much more efficient. They were 10th in yards per pass. And then the most interesting thing about the Chargers offense last year is this shift to the pass we got over the final 2/3 of the season. From weeks 1 through 6, the Chargers passed on just 47.6% of their plays. They had a -7% pass rate over expected. From week 7 on, 57.2% pass rate. So a jump of almost 10 percentage points. And they were positive 5% pass rate over expected. So a big shift in terms of actual pass rate and, designed pass rate from this offense.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that in that first half of the year, especially very early in the year, we had Justin Herbert working through multiple injury issues. Second half of the year, we had Gus Edwards out for a long span, and then we lost J.K. Dobbins for multiple weeks from a run game that you already mentioned was not especially good. So nobody knows for sure. We have 1 year of data with these two coaches together with the Chargers. So we can't say for sure this is why they shifted to the pass. Watch it shift back now. But I think based on the play calling history of these two guys, the way things started out last year and the factors that were involved, plus the changes I'm about to get to, I think that we should expect more of a run lean this year. And that started with signing Najee Harris this offseason, just a 1-year deal. So not a huge move, even though Najee Harris is a pretty big name in terms of what he did and was for the Steelers over his first 4 seasons. Then the Chargers drafted Omarion Hampton in round 1. That, of course, followed them dumping Gus Edwards and letting J.K. Dobbins walk in free agency, where he was just lingering on the market until that early June signing with Denver. So completely reshaped the backfield. Also drafted wide receiver Tre Harris in round 2, then drafted Keandre Lambert-Smith and tight end Oronde Gadsden in round 5. And Jared, a couple of round 5 pass catchers, not guys that I would expect typically to mention and spend much time on in this section, but training camp has included lots of buzz with both of these players.
Yeah, I think they've been two of the buzziest players in the entire NFL. Then, of course, we had Lambert-Smith have a pretty impressive preseason opener in the Hall of Fame game. Tre Harris has been quiet in camp from everything I've read. So that's interesting. We'll talk about those guys in the next section here. The other addition here is guard Mekhi Becton to this Chargers offensive line. He's going to replace Trey Pipkins, who was the weak link on this offensive line last year. So I think this O-line, they have a few other young players too that should still be ascending. I think this O-line could be really awesome in 2025.
Yeah, they of course drafted the O-tackle last year. And like you said, other young players that should continue to improve. They addressed that weak spot. So I think it'll be a good O-line and that will help the run game. And now let's move into the targets and we can talk about the specifics of who makes sense here, especially at market value. I got to start by saying, though, that I'm really not targeting much on this team, and we'll get to exactly why for each player. But, Jared, let me throw it to you. Is there anybody that you're specifically targeting among these Chargers?
Justin Herbert is my biggest target on the Chargers. He's quarterback 15 in ADP. We have him quarterback 12. If you look at Herbert last year, he finished quarterback 17 in points per game. But from week 7 on, he was quarterback 6 in total points and quarterback 8 in points per game. You alluded to it earlier, Matt. Herbert had those early season injuries. He dealt with plantar fascia in his right foot throughout August and then suffered a high ankle sprain in the opener. So I think that impacted the pass rate. I think it definitely impacted Herbert's rushing production as well. First 5 games, 5.2 rushing yards per game. His final 12 games, 23.9 15.3 rushing yards per game. He has over 15 rushing yards per game in 3 of his first 4 NFL seasons now. So he's going to add some with his legs. He's a super talented passer. The weaponry is upgraded now. We didn't even mention that, this team is potentially adding Keenan Allen to the mix. We'll see if that deal happens, but it seems like there's interest on both sides. So, I mean, the big thing for Herbert is what the pass rate is going to be, right? But I think at quarterback 15 ADP, unless it goes all the way back to what it was early in the season where they were, sub 50% pass, and I don't think that's going to be the case. As long as they're, over 50%, somewhere maybe in the mid 50s, I think Herbert's going to beat his price tag.
I think Justin Herbert's fine. You mentioned the QB 15 ADP, mid round 10. I haven't drafted him much to this point because I'm not a fan of Ladd McConkey at cost. And I think that stack is important for best ball. It's going to matter a lot less as we flip to more lineup setting drafts. And I'm more okay with Justin Herbert in that vein. The other reason that I'm not excited about him, though, is, the scheme that we talked about, where they've been slow paced throughout their history, Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. I don't think we should expect fast pace this year. And I think that we should expect a higher rushing rate this year than we got last year. So I just think it's going to cap his upside right around that QB8 range, which is certainly, good from a QB15 starting point if that is what we get from Justin Herbert. But I would expect that he'll settle somewhere in that low QB1 range and maybe below, might just wind up around QB15. So fine, but not a specific target for me. Ladd McConkey, I mentioned, he's at the end of round 2, wide receiver 11, according to consensus ADP. That positional ADP, wide receiver 11, is the same as he is on best ball sites. So I think that we can trust that McConkey is going to be in that range in drafts. He's one that I've second guessed myself at times whether I should be more in on him, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, he's the player that I was way off on last year, and off for a stupid reason. Like, I should have said at his wide receiver 4 price tag last year, I'm in, because even though I have no idea what the offense is going to look like, I have no idea what Ladd McConkey is going to do. I don't know what the target share is going to be. I don't know his efficiency. That range is just a good range in which to bet on a rookie wide receiver with at least the upside to lead his team in receiving. So I screwed up on that last year, but the market has completely corrected on that. And from wide receiver 11, I don't think he has the upside to be significantly above that. I don't think he has Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins upside from that starting ADP. So I'm more concerned that there's some downside from that spot where he gets some target share shaved off by better surrounding weapons. And especially if Keenan Allen does sign with the team from the slow paced, probably running more teams. So ultimately, I'm just landing on, I'm not scared to pass on Ladd McConkey. I'm not going to tell you that he's a terrible pick for you if you like him, because I know that the upside case can be made, but he's not somebody I'm betting on at cost this year.
I mean, we're only 2 spots behind consensus ADP at this point. He's 26th overall for us, 24th in overall ADP. And to me, I'm less concerned about him losing target share. I think he's a good enough player where he's going to match or maybe even beat last year's target share. But again, another player who's going to be impacted by this team's pass rate. If we don't get the same pass rate we got over the final 2/3 of the season for the Chargers, that's going to hurt Ladd McConkey. A couple other concerns I have: he vastly overachieved in touchdowns last year. He scored 7 receiving touchdowns, not a big number, but he had just 4.8 expected receiving touchdowns. That was 39th among wide receivers. He was just 57th among receivers in red zone targets, 50th in end zone targets, and he's a smaller slot receiver. We shouldn't expect him to put up massive touchdown totals as a pro. And then I do have some durability concerns here too. And we always say we don't want to ding guys too much for injury risk, but with Ladd McConkey, it goes back for a while. He missed a game last year with a knee injury. Also dealt with toe, hip, and shoulder injuries. Go back to college, 2022, he played through toe and knee injuries that year. And then in 2023, he missed the first 4 games of the season with a back injury, missed another game that year with a right ankle injury. So just over the last 3 years, that's a whole bunch of injuries, again, for a smaller player. He does, to me, seem like he's probably a bigger injury risk than a lot of other wide receivers.
Just to be fair, 1 point in his favor, you did call him a slot receiver. He's certainly their primary slot receiver, but is also an outside receiver, splits his time between those, played about 2/3, a little bit less than 2/3 in the slot last year, but did lead the wide receivers in playing time. So he's not a third receiver like Christian Kirk that we've talked about, that type of player where he comes off the field in 2 receiver sets. So will be on the field, but we have our concerns about him producing. The guy that I am interested in among these Chargers receivers, it's not Keandre Lambert-Smith, who I just learned existed when training camp began. It is Tre Harris. I don't care that it's been quiet around him. Maybe that ends up being the case, and he certainly could stay quiet through his rookie season. But this is where I want to learn that lesson on Ladd McConkey. He's just wide receiver 54 on Underdog in ADP. And I mean, I single out Underdog because that's the platform on which he should be. That's his ideal platform. There's no better platform for drafting Tre Harris in a redraft type of league than Underdog, which is half PPR with a playoff system where you want somebody peaking at the end of the season, which is when we know rookie wide receivers tend to peak. So he is the player type that I want to learn that Ladd McConkey lesson on and say, even if I don't know what Tre Harris's season is going to look like, as long as he's not overpriced in the market, I want to go ahead and be in on a guy who was a second-round pick by the Chargers, who did land in a place with some target share upside. They had Ladd McConkey and not a whole lot else in that passing game last year. So there is opportunity. And by the way, was a dominant playmaker in his 2 seasons in the SEC.
Yeah, he was. And I don't know, I might be about to be getting Ladd McConkey to this season because I have not been drafting much Tre Harris so far. And I like the prospect. As you said, Matt, the production was awesome. Over 100 yards per game across the last 2 seasons at Ole Miss. So he's playing SEC competition. The yards per route last year was just astronomical, 5.12, which is a number you don't see. Good size, 6'2", 205, 9.23 relative athletic score. So good athleticism. I went back though and read my prospect report on Tre Harris. And I talked about how his route tree is super limited. He kind of comes from that funky Ole Miss offense where it's really not pro style at all. And then his contested catches as well, I think, need a lot of work. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's someone that just is not an instant impact rookie and takes a while. I agree with you that he's priced cheap enough where that's fine. Like you can take the risk that maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe he does make an immediate impact, but I don't know. And again, we haven't heard much from him in camp. He didn't catch a ball in his preseason debut. They might sign Keenan Allen. I still think Quentin Johnston's going to be involved in this offense enough to, at least take some targets away from Tre Harris, even if he hits. So I don't know. I haven't been drafting a whole lot of Tre Harris. Could definitely come back to bite me.
And I'm not going to lie and say I've been collecting a ton, but I am interested. I don't want to forget about him because he very well could do nothing for us fantasy-wise this year. But that's why we're drafting him in the reserve range and seeing what the upside can be. I just don't want to be totally out on him. I also don't want to be out on Omarion Hampton, but I think we need to sort through what his actual price is. If you look at our ADP market index on draftsharks.com, you'll see Omarion Hampton in the first half of round 4. It says he's RB 17. I don't believe that because if you look at the best ball sites, he's creeping into round 2. He's RB 12 on both drafters and Underdog. He's ahead of Breece Hall and Kyron Williams in both places. I'm not even calling that unfair pricing because Najee Harris has yet to return to the field. And if we get Omarion Hampton on the field as the lead back and potential workhorse from the beginning of the year, he certainly looks capable of scoring in that range. But I think you have to know that you're going to need to pay up to get him. Make sure that you're okay with that. Don't get caught surprised during your draft at where he goes if you're hoping to land him.
Yeah, well, he's going to need to be a workhorse to pay off, late round 2, even early round 3 price tag. The Najee Harris thing obviously makes this tough, and we still have Najee projected to play week 1. And, that's part of the reasons why we only have Hampton RB 17 at this point. That might be wrong about Najee. We'll see. I think no one knows. I'm not even sure the Chargers know. That's what makes this tricky. I'm not going to be able to get there, I don't think, on Hampton as like a round 2 pick though. And it's nothing to do with the player. I think he's a great prospect. He got the size, 221 pounds, 1,500 plus rushing yards in 2 straight seasons. Also caught 67 passes over the last 2 years. So he has that 3-down skill set. My issue is that, for one, Harbaugh Roman offenses have tended to use a second running back. And they've had clear lead guys, but they've had other running backs that will get, 100 to 150 touches per season. I think that's kind of what they had in mind with Najee Harris. Again, we'll see if he's available for that. The other issue with this offense, this offense does not throw to the running back. And that goes all the way back to those San Francisco teams. Here's where those Harbaugh Roman teams have ranked in total running back receptions across their 5 seasons: 30th, 25th, 29th, 30th, and 32nd. Consistently near the very bottom of the league in total target volume. I'm not saying Hampton's going to be a 0 in the passing game, but I do think this offense is going to cap his receiving upside. And again, that's so huge in fantasy. If he's not going to be unleashed as a pass catcher, it's going to hurt his chances of really paying off, especially if he's going in round 2 at this point.
And we do have to throw in the caveat that those San Francisco teams included a lot of Colin Kaepernick playing quarterback. A running quarterback tends to be bad for running back receptions. Of course, Greg Roman's Baltimore offenses had Lamar Jackson at quarterback. So we don't know for sure. Maybe this version is friendlier to running back receptions, but we also only have that history to go on. We can guess at what it will look like otherwise, but we can't say, oh, it's for sure going to get this much better because they don't have Colin Kaepernick or Lamar Jackson. They have Justin Herbert, who's much more of a passer than those guys. So certainly at least not a mark in Hampton's favor. I'm with you. I don't want to say I'm out on Omarion Hampton, but I'm not sure I can get on board with him late in round 2. That means taking him over Josh Jacobs, over T. Higgins. Like, it's just, I don't think that I want to do that. If I'm drafting a bunch of teams, then I don't want to have 0 Omarion Hampton, but he can't be a target for me in that range.
Yeah, and again, I'm at least still working under the assumption that Najee Harris is going to play this year and be involved. That could be wrong.
Najee Harris is clearly on the verge of returning to football because he is walking laps around the field right now. I don't know if you saw that, but he is walking some freaking laps.
Yeah, which is scary. We're a month away from the season, and all he can do is walk laps. So again, I might be overestimating Harris's impact and be wrong on Hampton. But again, I think like if he's going late round 2, it's not a ceiling, but it's, again, if we don't expect the target volume to be huge, I think it's probably close to his ceiling.
Yeah, there's at least risk to him. I can't get over Najee Harris's current rehab plan, though, being get your steps in. I mean, come on.
Not good.
a surface eye injury, get out of here.
Yeah.
Anybody else that you're targeting or avoiding from this Chargers offense?
No. Again, I've taken some Quentin Johnston. We're actually a bit ahead of ADP on him. I do think, he took a decent step forward last year. This Chargers coaching staff actually knows how to use him. The previous staff had him as the deep ball guy, the contested catch guy. That is not what he is, despite him being a big wide receiver. He is at his best with the ball in his hands after the catch. That's how this coaching staff used him, and that definitely helped Quentin Johnston's production. So I don't think he's in for any type of breakout, but I do think he's going to remain involved enough in this offense where, especially in best ball, as like a wide receiver 5, I think he's a pretty nice pick.
Yeah, I like him at cost in best ball. I can't say that I'm going to be interested in a lineup setting league because I don't think he's going to get enough targets or be efficient enough to get into my lineup at any point, even if like Ladd McConkey went down.
Yeah. Yep, I agree.
And that's it for guys that I think are really worth talking through here. I guess we should say on Najee Harris, he's at the 9-10 turn right now. It's RB40. Yeah. He's surrounded by RB handcuffs, so it's kind of a fair range if he is totally healthy and ready to play football. That's clearly not the case right now. I think he's likely to go even later than that in drafts as we get further into August, especially if he's not on the field yet, but not going to be a guy that I target. But we're going to have to watch this eye recovery still.
Yeah, I'm just not drafting him at this point. And that'll change if I see him with a helmet on in pads doing football stuff. But at this point, I don't think the risk is worth the upside. I don't think there's a big enough ceiling on him.
You can not only see the rankings and ADP for all these players on DraftSharks.com, you can see who we actually are drafting because we ran through a bunch of specific draft plans from every spot in multiple formats. You can find those updated articles on DraftSharks.com. Find one that fits your format, or, just jump right into mock drafts that are your exact format, that take your synced board, your synced rankings, and run you through actual drafts so you can practice from your specific draft position. You can take the risky guys, you can take the floor players, you can see what happens at the end, and then do it all over again just to make sure that your plan is completely ironed out before you get to the real thing. Because at DraftSharks.com, we want to be your unfair advantage.